because I know you might want to hear this talk again. As you know, we are at a really radical stage with our ministry. We have a building, and we have a ministry, and we have a board with Sandra, who has joined us, clapping. So grateful that she's filling a vacant spot. And now we're creating this new format with Rosemary and James and myself building a circle of leadership. And things are evolving. Rosemary was with us, blessing us with her presence and also showing us. I want to be really honest. It also shows us what works and what didn't work for her. Right, Rosemary? It is all, I call this the vulnerable state of creation. There's a stage where you have an idea and then you put out the idea. And James can talk about that, I'm sure. And then there comes a stage where you're so vulnerable about it. People have opinions. Oh, this isn't going to work. Oh, yes, it will work. Oh, this is not going to work here, here, here. And you stand there naked with your little idea. And people have said all the things that. But anyway, no, Rosemary didn't do that. I didn't feel like I was standing in front of you naked. You just really told me what works and what needs improvement. So I was really, really grateful. But I don't want to take any more time, and I just want to ask James to take over now. We are all yours, James.
Thank you. Good to be with you again. Let's begin with a little time of meditation. I invite you to take a few moments to find a comfortable position and begin to open your heart and mind to the Infinite One, God, Spirit, different languages. It's Brahma, Allah, Yahweh. We are not concerned about the name, the language. We are open to the experience and the reality of the Infinite One. So we begin this time by centering our awareness on the simple idea of peace. Consciousness of peace is a consciousness of letting go of any things that may be disturbing from the past or worrying in the future. We are simply here now, releasing all that, allowing ourselves to breathe, to be open. It is this state of letting go, being open, that brings us into an awareness of the perfect peace, mind of God, perfect peace of the Infinite One and of our oneness. It's consciousness of oneness. We experience and our feelings of love, our feelings of being connected, our feelings of affection and empathy and compassion and benevolence, kindness. All these different ways, these shades of love, our feelings of the reality of the oneness, of the interconnectedness, of the reality of the Infinite One. That's what we're open to in this state of peace. So we may experience it as love. We may experience it as a sense of all things being interconnected. The connections between our consciousness and our experiences. connection of our bodies to the air, the atmosphere, the earth. Surrender to this consciousness of oneness, this consciousness of the one. Our very consciousness as that, the infinite one experiencing itself as love and oneness. Space of love and oneness. We find peace and we find healing. That one harmonizes all things through divine law and through divine love. All things become harmonized. All things work for the good for those who love God. Those who love God see the oneness and the working out and the harmonization of things. So now we bring into our consciousness of peace and love and oneness and harmony. We bring into our consciousness these bodies that we work through. We recognize the love and the harmony and the oneness, body, mind, and environment. In this divine unity, we find healing of the body and of the soul. We released all thoughts of limitation and a recognition of the infinity of the divine reality. We are knowing and trusting whatever needs to be healed is being harmonized and healed right now in this body. In the light of divine love, we are aglow with spirit. We bring into our consciousness anyone in our lives that we would bless in our thoughts and prayers, that we would hold in the consciousness of their unity with the infinite one, of their oneness with the healing power. They're resting in that divine presence. We bring them into this sphere of a consciousness of love and peace and harmony. Bring them in. Bring as many into this sphere as you can think of. Bring the whole world into this sphere. So we rest for a few moments, silent awareness of truth, blessing all those we think of, and releasing all things to the infinite one in the silence. Our consciousness of oneness with the infinite, we recognize there are no limitations, not only for healing, but for supply, for any works that we may be engaged in. We let go of ideas of limitation and recognize omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence manifesting in us, as us, and through us to bring forth healing, guidance, wisdom, abundance, peace. So in this we are joyful, in this we are blissful, and we are grateful. We recognize that this consciousness is the Christ consciousness. We accept it as our reality gratefully, filled with joy. So it is. And, uh, welcome once again. I was so interested to hear Maya introduce me with talking about what works and what doesn't work. It's very much relevant to what I'm talking about today, as you'll see. So, one of the things, maybe you've noticed this, is more and more frequently I hear people say things like, well, everything is relative. I hear people use phrases like, well, that's my truth, and that's your truth, as if truth were a personal possession, individually owned and operated. These notions of the relativity of everything and of personal truths are really derived, I think, culturally in our collective consciousness from three sources, primarily from three sources. One of the sources is actually a common misunderstanding of Einstein's theory of relativity.
Oh,
Second source is the moral relativism as it is an instrument of anthropology. The third source is just of the proponents of moral relativism in academic philosophy. So these three currents in culture, I think, have led to people thinking more and more of truth as something relative, or truth as something that's, well, can be my truth, but not your truth because you have your truth and I have mine. So I want to clear up some of this, at least as I understand it. Einstein's theory of relativity does not prove that everything is relative. It is specifically about how time is relative to the motion of the observer. Physicists understand that the theory of relativity is true. It's not relative, it's true. It is not relatively true. It is not true relative to personal perspective. In a sense, time is relative to personal perspective. But the truth of the theory is not relative to personal perspective. Passage of time, for example, is the same for every observer who is moving at the same speed in the same direction. It's a scientific truth, if you will, and it's not relative. Right? So most people sort of, jump for, or I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people jump from this idea of the theory of relativity to everything is relative. And of course, that's not the way scientists see that. They see that as a truth, not a relative truth, but a truth. The theory is truth. Right? Now, the second source I mentioned, moral relativism in anthropology, is actually not so much a theory as a tool. It's an instrument for purposes of objectively reporting, as an anthropologist, different cultural mores, beliefs, and values. The anthropologist, in their work, tries to suspend value judgments while observing and reporting the nature of different cultures and societies. They're not claiming that truth or morality is relative in a very broad, sort of general sense, but they are trying to observe cultures and not project their moral judgments on what they observe and how they report it. They want to report objectively. So even anthropologists who might talk about this idea of moral relativism, morality being relative to culture is basically the idea. Even they have certain beliefs that they hold to be true about morality privately, but in their public work, they try to take this sort of objective position and not judge in reporting. But that again is another source of people's thinking that everything is relative. Now, I'm not going to go into the argument that's found, or I should say, the debate about moral relativism that's found in academic philosophy. It's too complicated, it's too technical. And eventually, here, I'll make my own sort of philosophical position pretty clear about that. We know that religions share some common ground on moral and spiritual truths. And that's especially true in the mystical traditions that you honor here every week at Unity Montreal. On the other hand, we also know There are many points of dispute about truth among the various religions. If we're honest, there are different religions because there are differences about their understandings of what is true. And we can also ask the question, are there political truths? And if there are, how could we know them? That's sort of the question for today. With all this notion of relativity and personal truths and those sorts of things that are part of the culture, can we know the truth? Are there ways, or is there a way that we can know truth? Because if we could resolve these questions that we have about morality, about spirituality, about politics, if we could resolve those things, if we could come to an understanding of truth, we would resolve the most significant and widespread conflicts in the human realm. And if we cannot resolve those questions, if we cannot agree about truth, then humanity can only devolve into chaos. If we want peace, health, prosperity, and a better world in general, the most important challenge of our times, I believe, is how to resolve disagreements about truth, how to get at the truth within nations and between nations. In news, media, and politics, there are now extremely different opinions about what is true. Religions, of course, continue to be divided about what is true spiritually and morally at some points. All the disagreements about truth make it extremely difficult to solve problems or even to agree upon what problems need to be solved. The problem of truth cannot be solved within the realms of disagreement. Political rhetoric does nothing to get at truth and only very rarely arrives at agreement. Likewise, opinion columns and opinion polls do more than express opinions. They don't demonstrate truth so that all may come to agreement. Religious texts by themselves cannot prove their own truth, the truth of their own contents. Because if they did, everyone would agree on all religious questions. Therefore, we must find a way to stand, in effect, outside of the usual arenas of divisive arguments, find a different way to understand what truth is. Fortunately, we can look to science for clues, because scientists, the scientific community, is in fundamental agreement on methods and on facts and on theories. Science is not relativistic, nor is it merely rhetorical, as political opinions are, for example. Scientific method, for one thing, collects facts. Scientific facts are truths that can be verified by any observer. That's the idea. That's why there can be agreement. If you went to high school and studied chemistry or some other science or studied it in college, a big part of what you do is reproduce experiments that others had produced and get the same results. Hence, you can observe the truth, in effect, of being taught. And science doesn't, of course, just collect facts. It has methods for interpreting facts, to verify or falsify theories. Scientific method uses experimentation and mathematics to sort out causes and correlations. An experiment then must be designed to either falsify or verify a hypothesis, ideally both. Experimentation, in other words, can reveal truth that can be agreed upon. Experimentation. Now, we don't often think of politics in this way, but sometimes politics involves social experiments. Social experiments can show us correlations between policies and conditions. The implementation of new laws is always, in effect, a social experiment. We can ask, what will be the consequences of the law? And then we can identify those consequences once it's been implemented. For example, something that's very much on our minds here in the United States is gun control. Gun control is a very controversial political topic in the United States, especially because of this tragic mass shootings, the frequency of them, and the extent of them. Other nations, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and others, have implemented laws that have dramatically decreased gun violence and almost eliminated the problem of mass shootings. So other nations have already demonstrated by their social experiments what kinds of policies can diminish gun violence. So it's a social experiment that shows what works and what doesn't work, as Maya was talking about before. Unfortunately and tragically, in the United States, there are too many people that cannot see the truth on this subject. Why not just emulate what other nations have done successfully? And I can only conclude from my own observations that there's simply a significant percentage of the public in the United States currently that simply does not really care about reducing gun violence. And so the laws don't get passed. Nevertheless, there are facts and truths about what works to diminish gun violence. We know these from these social experiments, as I put them, that have been done in other countries. So there's an example of how to get at the truth. Accepting the truth obviously becomes then the next issue. Science, including social experiments, can show us truth, but not how we ought to use that truth. Not how we ought to use that truth. That is one reason we need spiritual values and spiritual truth to get at what is best, right? What ought we do once we know truth? One thing science has discovered is that many events, perhaps most events, some would claim all events in the universe, conform to mathematical formulas. Mathematical truths are kind of another level of truth. They're not physical objects or events. Math truths are true independently of whatever facts there may be. Mathematical truths are necessarily true everywhere, all the time. In fact, these kinds of truths, we might say, are eternal truths because they would be true even if there were no physical universe. So, in that sense, mathematical truths are an example of transcendent truth. Now, you may think initially that mathematics has nothing to do with spiritual truths and values. But I would point out that some mathematical concepts are actually embedded in theology, in our ways of thinking about the universe and God. Every religion that believes in a God also believes that God is infinite. And infinity is a mathematical concept. There are an infinite number of true mathematical ideas, and where there are ideas, true ideas, there is mind. And so from this, I conclude quite simply, or I infer, that there must be an infinite mind holding infinite truths. In any case, the idea of infinity or limitlessness, which is a mathematical concept, is embedded in our idea of the divine, whether we call it God or Brahma or by some other name. Most religions affirm that there is one God, that God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is what? One. And one, of course, is a number. One is a mathematical idea. The idea of one is a primary principle of arithmetic and therefore of mathematics. And beyond that, unity is fundamental to the nature of the world. For all things are interconnected by space, time, and natural laws. The universe is one. There is unity. And the mystics that we speak about every week here in these services, the mystics of all religious traditions affirm that ultimate reality has the attribute of oneness. They, again, use sometimes different words. One of my favorite new words from the mystics is unitude. The universe has unitude. In any case, all these mystics affirm this idea of the oneness of the divine, of the oneness or the unity of God, of reality. And so unity, we might say, from the mystical perspective, is a spiritual truth. And it's not only a spiritual idea, it's also a value. And I said in spirituality, we try to get at these values that science cannot. We value, most of us, we value social unity. And we know that we can accomplish more when we are unified in purpose than when we are divided. We know the power of unity from history, from, again, what works and what doesn't. And I think we know it intuitively as well. We don't have to learn mathematics to sense oneness. At some level, all of us, from the smallest children to the most senior and seasoned adults, all of us at some level know that we're all in this together. We may ignore that truth sometimes, but at some level, we always know it. And that's why love is a central value in every religion. Love unifies, love unites us. Love is the feeling of being connected to others. That feeling we may experience as or call by different names: compassion, empathy, kindness, benevolence. To paraphrase the Apostle Paul, there is no law against love. Love is a central value, spiritual truth, and gives us a clue as to what we ought to do with the other truths that we know. We try, with holding to this value, we try to apply our truths in a consciousness of love, compassion, empathy, benevolence, right? So we know that science and math work for finding truth. It works. There's a philosophy about this, philosophy called pragmatism. It was developed by American philosophers, Charles Saunders Peirce, William James, you've probably heard of, John Dewey, and many pragmatists today. The pragmatists contend that actually what we mean by truth is that an idea, a statement, or an action works. That's what we mean when we say something's true. We really mean it works. So pragmatists say that science is true insofar as it works. If we find an idea or method that works, we take it as true, unless and until we find something that works better. So truth, or I should say our consciousness of truth, evolves in human consciousness. And sometimes we discover new ideas that work better than the previous ideas. In a sense, those become our new truths. But if they were true all along before we discovered them. And that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? It's finding truth, or finding better and better understandings, or deeper and deeper, broader and broader understandings of truth. So science, the scientific method, works for describing patterns and predicting events in the physical world. It does not show us a way to discover spiritual truths, the truths about what we ought to do, how we ought to live, nature of God, life after death, and so forth. Science cannot answer such questions. But spiritual answers are important to us. We want to know these things, do we not? We want to know how to be the best version of ourselves. We want to know what is good. Though science cannot answer such spiritual questions, we can apply pragmatic approaches akin to science and math to know spiritual truths. Through reasoning and experimentation, we can discover what is good and true. I point now to something that Jesus said. He said, "A sound tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Thus you will know them by their fruits. You will know them by their fruits." If you hear that statement, what Jesus is saying, in effect, he affirmed that goodness and truth, the goodness and truth of ideas are known by their fruits, are known by their consequences, are known by, as we might say, as a pragmatist would say, what works. So I believe Jesus was a pragmatist. He knew what worked and taught what worked. Now, the Fillmores and other New Thought teachers used pragmatic approaches to answer their questions. They experimented. Myrtle experimented with affirmations and found that she got good results. Therefore, from her results, she concluded that her affirmations were true, that she was, in fact, a child of God, and therefore did not inherit sickness. She focused on praising divine life in her body, and this resulted in healing. It produced good fruits, and so she knew that her affirmations were true by experimentation because it worked. Charles experimented also with affirming affirmations, with listening into silence, and by paying attention to his dreams. He tested a hypothesis that he could verify or falsify. So if God is spirit and I am spirit, then we can somehow communicate. He recognized maybe this experiment would work, maybe it wouldn't, but he tried it. He tested his hypothesis. He began to think of all the ways. He sat down and used all the different ways that he had learned to concentrate on God, to concentrate on spiritual truths, affirmations, sitting in silence, and so on. And he began to have precognitive dreams. He began to have dreams in which he received guidance about what to do in his life. He got good fruits. He concluded that his experiment was successful, that he was, in fact, communicating with spirit, in this case, through dreams. Later, he realized he could also communicate with spirit through what we might call the faculty of intuition. He found that he could be divinely guided, he could be healed, and he could be prospered. So Charles and Myrtle called this teaching sometimes the science of spirit. They also called it practical Christianity. A practical is just another word for pragmatic. We teach it because it works. So if we experiment with spiritual hypotheses, we can find out if our hypotheses are pragmatically true, that is, if they work. Suppose, for example, I hypothesize that focusing my mind on spiritual ideas beneficially affects my physical conditions. I can test my hypothesis by observing how meditation or on spiritual ideas affects my emotions and physiology. In fact, I did an experiment on this with other people one time, but I won't go into that now. But if by intentionally meditating, your emotions and body change in a beneficial way, then you know your thoughts affect your body. You've learned pragmatically, your thoughts affect your body. And there have been many scientific studies that verify the beneficial effects of meditation, for example. Now, mind metaphysics or idealist metaphysics, the kind of metaphysics that Unity teaches and holds to, implies in theory that what we take to be material objects are actually mental objects, ultimately mental objects. Mind moves mental objects, or what we call ideas. So mind, in theory, can move molecules and other object ideas. Now, when we meditate and mentally induce relaxation, and we meditate and induce relaxation, our blood vessels expand, thereby increasing blood flow. That is why you may sometimes have noticed when you're meditating or when you're done meditating that your hands feel warm after you've prayed or meditated. You notice this sort of tingling sensation. That's actually measurable. Your hands have, in fact, increased in temperature, but your mind, think about this, while you're meditating, your mind was moving the molecules in your arms and hands. They were expanding blood vessels. They were moving, your mind was moving molecules. This, again, is a fact that's been measured in multiple ways by various experiments. It's also been demonstrated that some meditators can affect their heart rate and blood pressure mentally and other things. Again, examples of moving molecule ideas with their minds. Mind metaphysics works better at explaining such phenomena than materialism does. Therefore, I claim mind metaphysics is at least pragmatically true. We can move molecules with our minds. We can know spiritual truths in a pragmatic sense by experimentation. Any experimentation that's been done in the past can be done again. That's why we can apply the methods that the Fillmores and other New Thought teachers applied and see how they work for us. Sometimes one kind of meditation will work better for one person, another will work better for a different person. The Fillmores did not always immediately get the results they sought. Sometimes it took years of persistent application. However, some results were quick and even immediate. Charles, for example, discovered pretty quickly that he could be guided by spirit through dreams and intuition. He discovered pretty quickly that his prayer process, relieved his chronic pain. And anyone who's had chronic pain knows that's actually a pretty big thing. Now, these results gave him confidence to persist in the work, what he called regenerating his leg. And that took many years of persistence. But he made measurable progress, literally measurable progress. His leg grew over 2 inches. And of course, the Fillmores quickly discovered that their prayers could help others heal as well. In our culture today, I don't know this is necessarily true in Canada, but I hear it a lot in the United States. There are people who mock the idea of holding people in their thoughts and prayers. They say, these folks do, what is needed is action. And they are not wrong about the need for action. But I think they are misguided to ridicule thoughts and prayers. Thousands of people, maybe millions, have experienced healing through thoughts and prayers. In fact, when you think about it, every great achievement begins in mind, in thought, in will, in imagination, in understanding, and in love. Holding others in prayerful thoughts, holding them in the awareness that the divine is within them and is them. Holding people in that prayerful consciousness can do something. At the very minimum, prayer changes the one who prays. And that change impacts our presence and our action in the world in a positive way, which in turn changes the world a little bit for the better. My consciousness and your consciousness affect the mental atmosphere of the planet. If we go forth into the world in a consciousness of peace and love, our presence of peace and love affects the mental atmosphere wherever we go. Just think, if millions and millions go out in peace and love consciousness, all those little bits of change, all those little bits of atmospheric change can build and build until ultimately the whole world can be transformed. Yes, it might take many generations to transform the global mental atmosphere into planetary love and peace. But making that effort is still a good option, certainly better than just complaining or giving up. We in Unity are engaged in the great experiment of holding the world in thoughts and prayers of peace, love, healing, and abundance. Now there are millions developing this consciousness through meditation. Not just Unity people, but people of many faiths and those who identify even as spiritual but not religious. Just as we know that meditative prayer blesses us personally, we can be confident that this great experiment is revealing truth and blessing the world. The progress may be slow, but we do not get weary, for we know that the Almighty Spirit of the Infinite One is with us and within us, and we know that Almighty Spirit cannot fail.
Wonderful. How timely. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am stopping the recording now. I think we succeeded, or we're not. Not yet. I just want to bring you back, actually, from this experience. And most of all, I'm really working on being able to upload the talks. Oh, I'm still recording. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'm uploading the talks. Oh, I see.